11.0.5 dropped a few days ago. There were a lot of changes to enhance in this patch. I would say the two most notable changes were Ascendance went from a 3-minute to a 2-minute cooldown, and Stormblast now gives 2 charges of Storm Strike. And I think this is insane because your cooldown lineups are so much better than before, and because of the Stormblast talent, the build that is commonly referred to as Storm, I think is now the highest output build in Mythic Plus. So here are the talents that I've decided on. It is a build with every Storm Strike talent and not much else, because having 2 charges of Storm Strike means most of your builder globals can simply just be Storm Strike. I will go more in depth on these decisions later in the video. So for the core of this build, we are still using the Stormbringer tree. We are still incredibly focused on generating and spending our Maelstrom weapon resource. The biggest difference in gameplay loop between this build and the previously played Lava Lash focus build, commonly known as Elementalist, is that we now have one incredibly high priority builder that eclipses the others, and that is Stormstrike. Stormstrike generates the most Maelstrom of all of our builders, it does the most damage, it has a very high chance at all times to reset its own cooldown, and it has 2 charges. So in most situations, when you are pressing a builder, you are pressing Stormstrike. All your other builders are either low priority or only useful for keeping up buffs or debuffs. Crash Lightning is a builder spell which, when it hits 2 or more targets, it grants a buff for 12 seconds that makes your Storm Strike and other builders cleave. It is very important that this buff is up at almost all times when pressing builders. And next we have our 2 Flame Shock applicators, Lava Lash and Voltaic Blaze. These spells are only really useful to maintain Flame Shocks. Lava Lash, when cast on a target with Flame Shock, will spread it, and Voltaic Blaze is a proc that makes your Flame Shock cast hit 6 targets. You cannot consistently have Voltaic Blaze active every time you need to spread Flame Shocks. However, if you do have it active, then you would use Voltaic Blaze over Lava Lash to apply Flame Shocks. Now, it is very important when you're using Primordial Wave that you have used one of these abilities recently so that you have multiple Flame Shocks active. But otherwise, these 2 abilities are the lowest level of filler that you would only press if you had no Storm Strikes. And Sundering is an ability that does very low damage. We are only taking it to get to Storm Flurry in the tree. We only want to press it if we have nothing else, or we need an AoE stop. Now, our spending logic is that when we get to 10 Maelstrom, we are pressing a spender at highest priority. If Tempest is active, that spender is Tempest. Otherwise, it is Chain Lightning on 2 targets or Lightning Bolt on 1 target. Now, for our general priority, considering both builders and spenders, we will spend on 10 Maelstrom. Otherwise, we will build up with Stormstrike. If we have no Stormstrike, we spend on 5+ Maelstrom. And if we have none of that, then we are pressing our low priority fillers. Unless we need the Crash Lightning buff or we need to spread Flame Shock in AoE, in which case those take priority over Stormstrike. And the final rotational ability is Feral Spirits, which is a micro cooldown damage buff. This has had its cooldown nerfed, so you no longer need to press it instantly off cooldown every time it comes up. You still want to press it on cooldown. However, if you have Ascendance or Primordial Wave coming up, or if a pack is almost dead, then you can hold it for a few seconds. Now, I'll go over Tempest and Primordial Wave again. Not much has changed here since my last guide. Tempest is the spell of your Stormbringer hero tree. When you spend 40 Maelstrom total, you get a Tempest proc, which is your strongest spender by far. Now, it is mandatory to use this weak aura from NICU. It will tell you how close you are to triggering your next Tempest. There is a setting in custom options where it counts up instead of down. I like to use this setting. The reason Tempest is so important for your damage is because it summons a Thunderdog, which is a multiplicative 20% damage buff. It also increases the damage of your next Chain Lightning. And for this reason, we always want to have our first Tempest cast very early into a pull to get these buffs rolling. Otherwise, we will be spending like 10 seconds at the start of a pull not doing any damage. And the way we do this is by watching our weak aura. When we are finishing a pull, we want to build up to 30 Maelstrom spent on our tracker and then stop spending. You could potentially proc a Tempest and save it for next pull. However, the proc only lasts 30 seconds, so this is quite risky. Now again, it is very important that you play your Primordial Waves correctly. When you cast Primordial Wave, you get a buff that makes your next cast of Lightning Bolt or Tempest send out additional Lightning Bolts to all of your Flame Shock targets. It is very important that on AoE, you are activating this buff with a Tempest and never a Lightning Bolt, because if you were to press Lightning Bolt, you would simply be wasting a spender cast on a single target ability. And the main purpose of Primordial Wave on AoE is that it applies 6 lightning rods, so you're creating this micro cooldown window where all of your spenders do 60% more damage. Activating Wave with a Tempest allows you to enter this window with a charge of Arc Discharge and an extra Lightning Dog. And a note on single target, it does not matter what you use to activate your Wave, this is only for AoE. So to enter a pool, you would be pressing Wave, Crash Lightning for the buff, a Lava Lash to spread Flame Shocks, then you would cast Chain Lightning and build back up until you have Tempest and 10 Maelstrom, at which point you will cast Tempest and enter a Lightning Rod window. If you enter a pool with no Tempest and 0 progress towards your next Tempest, then you simply have to give up and use a Lightning Bolt into your Wave. This will be significantly less damage, but the only way around it would have been to play better in the previous pool and come out of it with stacks. So now we have to understand Ascendance and Doom Winds, and this has changed a bit since we started running the Storm build. So the main purpose of Ascendance is that you generate 30 extra Maelstrom over the duration, which translates to more than 3 extra spenders, a lot of progress towards your Tempest, a lot of cooldown reduction on Wolves, and your Storm Strike becomes significantly stronger. Because you are generating so much Maelstrom in this cooldown, you will have more overlapped Tempest than usual and end up with a lot of stacked Thunder Dogs, massively multiplying your damage. Now, something that is new is that we are running Doom Winds, and while in Doom Winds, your Storm Strike will reset much more often, essentially causing Wind Strike to have no cooldown. So when you enter Ascendance, you want to spend 1 global on either Chain Lightning, Tempest, or Wind Strike to empty your Maelstrom, and then you want to press Doom Winds. And the reason we do this mid-Ascendance is to have the most overlapped uptime of Doom Winds and Ascendance. While in Doom Winds, you want to spam Wind Strike, except for when you get a Tempest proc, which you will manually cast at 10 Maelstrom stacks. You don't need to worry about priming Thorims anymore. If you hit 2 targets with Tempest or Primordial Wave, then it will auto-prime to Chain Lightning, which is any AoE situation. Additionally, when primed to Chain Lightning, Thorims will no longer auto-cast Tempest, which is a good thing, because it lets us hard-cast 10-stack Tempest in our Ascendance. And if your Feral Spirit comes up during Ascendance, you should still press it, unless you only have a few seconds left of Ascendance. And then your Doom Winds cast outside of Ascendance should be used strictly off cooldown 1 minute later. You should try to fit a lot of Storm Strikes into it, but it doesn't really matter. You should always prioritize spending and keeping other buffs up, even in the mini 1 minute Doom Winds. It does some pulsing AoE damage, but that's not really important. It is quite important to always have a Doom Winds up for Ascendance though, and if you're desynced, it might be worth delaying Doom Winds. Alright, so here is a model opener I wanted to show you. I go into this pool with already a pre-stacked Tempest and some pre-stacked Maelstrom. I Flame Shock on some random mob. I put Primordial Wave on the prior mob. I Lava Lash off of the prior mob, and then I Chain Lightning once to put Lightning Rod on the prior mob and to not have any issues with threat. I get a reset. I use my Trinket, and then I send my Primordial Wave Tempest into the mobs. I will Crash Lightning once, and then go into Ascendance. I spend my Maelstrom here, and then I go into Doom Winds, and here I'm just using my 10-stack Tempest and spamming Wind Strike. I get the stun on me, I use my Jetstream Wind Rush to clean it, and here I'm just spamming Wind Strike, Wolves, and 10-stack Tempest. So now I will talk about some procs or abilities that I have not yet covered. Again, Lava Burst is useless while not talented into Elemental Blast. You don't ever press it. Frost Shock is useless while not talented into Hailstorm. It is not worth the point in the class tree, get some more utility instead. Flame Shock, you will press on pool while entering a pool with 6 or more mobs because Lava Lash only spreads to 5. But now you also run Voltaic Blaze, which is a proc that makes your Flame Shock bind AoE and apply to 6 mobs. And this is very nice in situations where you have the proc and need to apply Flame Shocks. The Arc Discharge buff has been changed up a bit. Instead of having 2 stacks, it now only has 1 stack. It also applies to Lightning Bolt, and it causes the spender you use to echo. However, this echo does not benefit from Maelstrom weapon stacks, and also it does not benefit from the 40% increase from Arc Discharge itself. So it is largely irrelevant, and I would not recommend playing around Arc Discharge in any way. Just treat it like a free buff, it plays itself. The one advantage of the Arc Discharge Echo is that it does apply a lightning rod to a random enemy that is not your target. Now, to speak about lightning rod tab targeting, this is a common topic of contention. Yes, it is technically more damage to cast Chain Lightning on off targets to apply extra lightning rods. However, in most pools, this does not actually speed the pool up. It just adds extra damage to mobs that would die earlier anyways. In pools with multiple prior mobs, you should try to spread it to those prior mobs, but if you are losing damage in any way trying to spread Lightning Rod, it is not worth it. Also, you never want to spread Lightning Rod with Tempest because you want to use your Tempest for prior damage. Now, I recommend to not worry about tab targeting at all unless you are very experienced. I don't think it is a significant damage gain. Now, to speak about talents, I don't think this build is a strict one-fits-all build like the Lava Lash build was. I think there are about 6 points in this tree that are low value and interchangeable. Now, we are running Sundering right now, simply for talent pathing. The ability Sundering itself does incredibly little damage and only really has value as a stop. The advantage is it only takes 1 talent point rather than 2 to get to Storm Flurry. Voltaic Blaze is a nice proc that helps a bit with Flame Shock uptime because this build can go over 30 seconds at a time without having to press Lava Lash. However, its damage is quite poor and its global does not generate much Maelstrom, so it is only useful for applying Flame Shocks. Otherwise, it is low priority filler. You still need to talent Lava Lash spread because Voltaic Blaze is not a reliable way to have Flame Shocks for every Primordial Wave. Now, Fire Nova. This is a button that was a very good generator in the last build, but because you can press Storm Strike so often and it generates so much, the value of Fire Nova has gone down immensely. Storm Strike can often generate 6 or more Maelstrom on AoE and doesn't require Flame Shocks active, which means Fire Nova has been crowded out of the rotation. Elemental Blast vs Tempest Strikes is still a big personal preference node. Elemental Blast will be marginally more single target at the trade of marginally less prior damage and increased complexity. I recommend only using Elemental Blast in Mist for the first boss burn, otherwise I don't think it is worth the extra stress to think about. And sadly, Flowing Spirits is bugged at the time of this video's release. It causes your Tempest summon wolves from Rolling Thunder to only have 8-second duration. If this is fixed, I still think the proc rate is too low for Flowing Spirits to be useful. However, I will test it when that happens and write down my thoughts in the description. Now here is an Ice Strike build that I think is also viable. It will give you a bit more single target damage compared to the Sundering build at a trade-off of having to Lava Lash for Flame Shock uptime more often. I believe this build should have very similar throughput to the Sundering build. And if anyone still enjoyed playing the Hot Hands Elementalist build, you can still play it. I think it's worse overall, but it's still a good option and you will still do big damage playing it. And if you're looking to have a bit of fun and try something different, you can also try play Totemic, which can do very high burst if you get lucky on Sundering resets. However, the damage will definitely be lower and your damage outside of cooldowns will be non-existent. Now in terms of gearing, I would recommend getting your haste to the DR, which is the 20k, then putting the rest into mastery, and you'll incidentally have a little bit of crit and verse. For the flask, you can use either haste or alchemical chaos depending on your stats. In terms of trinkets, I recommend using 1 unused trinket, which is either Scarden's Grace or Treacherous Transmitter, and 1 passive trinket, which I would recommend Red Egg over Knife over Purple Egg at equivalent eye levels. Now, an additional note I should say is if you're in a key with an Org Evoker, make sure they take Timelessness. You will probably have threat issues, unless your tank is very experienced. Now, unfortunately, I do think this spec is very powerful right now. I do foresee some changes happening potentially. I hope they are not too harsh. I will leave some updates in the comments or description if they do happen.